How many people are totally put off by seeing a class, an APL class?
This is an APL class.
Does this make people completely unable to make sense of this?
It's the first one I've seen.
No.
It is.
Yeah?
It is.
The important thing about this, try if you're put off by the fact that it's a class. This is a class where I can take what new UTF-8 file and the name of the file as the constructor, and then I can refer to a text property. If I read it, if I say, my file gets quad new UTF-8 file, name of file, then I can go my file dot text. That will call the get function of the text property. So if I go my file dot text, it runs this line of code, which calls the .NET method called system.io.file.readAllLines with the file name as the argument. Yeah. And this is a .NET method which, believe it or not, splits the character array, the character vector up into an array on new lines. You get a vector of vectors back from a .NET method. Right? It's a one-liner. Read a UTF-8 file in .NET. System.io.file.readAllLines, name of the file. It has all the code inside it to find out whether it's a UTF-8 file or a UTF-16 file or a UCS2 file or whatever. You don't worry about that. It just returns it.
Miracle.
So I could use that line naked. I don't need
.NET
all.
has got some seriously useful stuff in it. Yeah. And when you want to write it, so when you go myfile.text is assigned and a nested vector, it calls this function, system.io.file.writeAllLines, several arguments here. Name of the file. Args.newValue is the value that the property is being set to. And then there's an optional third argument, which is a reference to one of these things called an enumeration. System.text.encoding.utf8. So that's an explicit instruction to say, well, whatever it was when I wrote it, when I write it, I always want to use UTF-8. Right? So we could have. So there's the next example here. Unfortunately, the animations here are.
Is it possible that using gets quote quote should be using gets end close quote quote?
Both would work.
Not for me.
It needs to be raveling close quote.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't explain the logic of what happens when you assign what you gets quote quote exactly, but I think it gets translated to raveling close quote quote. What using is supposed to be a vector of .NET namespaces that are searched. The way the .NET interface works is that you set quad using, and then if you type anything which is a value error in the workspace, APL says, well, before I give you the value error, you look at quad using and walk through it and see whether there's a .NET thing.
I'm okay. I retract my objection.
It should
I made a mistake.
So here we are. So we used it. We retrieved the text property. We did a comma gets. Morten was here. And just the mere fact of assigning that property called the setter. And when we look at it with Notepad, there it's been updated. Right? And here's just to show the listing. System.text.encoding.quadnl -2. For those of you not familiar with quadnl with negative numbers, it means display not only the objects that APL has put into this box, but any properties exposed by the underlying object model. And in this case, that is these different encodings. So these are the different types of encodings that you could instruct. Write all lines to it. Okay, I'm going to skip this demo because we don't have that much time. I'll show some APL again soon to prevent people from falling asleep. Okay, so what other external interfaces do we have to worry about? Well, there's the COM and .NET interfaces. There's no problem there because, in fact, ever since these interfaces were invented, Dyalog APL has been translating the code to Unicode to UTF-16, well, initially to CS2 and now to UTF-16 on the way up. In version 12, we simply deleted a bunch of lines of code. We don't need to translate it anymore. Well, actually, you may need to marshal it from 8.0 to whatever, but there's no translation going on, just widening or narrowing. Yeah. So in this read all lines here, we just got Unicode data back from .NET, and don't think twice about it. Anything that goes to or from .NET has always been, in fact, Unicode. Okay, time for a game of chess. We need a bit of fun here to keep people awake in the afternoon. Okay, here we go. Right, big letters. Ooh, look at that. The latest version of the APL 385 Unicode font, and that means dated towards the end of last week. Adrian has put the chess pieces in. Those are standard Unicode chess pieces, black ones and white ones. They just weren't in. When I did this demo before last week, I had to switch to MS Arial Unicode at this point. Okay, so there they are. Okay. So we can start building up a chessboard here, right? White and black is 1 and 2. So we can create an index, null.catenate officers and 8 pawns, and then we need to reverse the black pieces, so rotate the other end of the pieces by 8, and there we are, and then do some expansion, and we're now starting to have something looking like a chessboard. And we can do things like this, right? Because these are just characters like any others. Plus.board, plus.equals white pawn. Create a form. Set the font. So I'm going to use the Arial Unicode font here because it's slightly nicer still for chess pieces than neighboring stuff. So make a grid object. Put our board variable in as the data at position 0, 0, and with the same sizes and form, so it just fills the whole form. Set the title width and the cell widths. It's going to be a Greek game of chess. Create 2 background colors, different shades of grey, and then set the cell types to a checkerboard pattern.
Amazing.
And it's going to not upset the Romans, we'll put in. And now we can do things, like we can. So we can start writing. There's this. Doing the GUI is the hard part of writing any application. So now the rest is easy. We can extract the values and ravel them. And what are the unique pieces? Get a frequency count. This is all how you demo APL to the guy across the street, and he doesn't buy one anyway.
A street?
So here's our data. And let's just show off Adrian's pie charting. Here's our population count. Did that do anything?
It takes a while sometimes, maybe the first time.
The focus was gone from, I didn't have the cursor on the data variable, so I didn't know what I wanted to.
That's brilliant.
So there we are. So there's the population frequency count of our chessboard. Isn't that cool? Okay, so let's make an OLE client. Excel, let's make it visible. Get rid of all this stuff here. Yeah, unfortunately, running out of space. Okay, add a workbook. Into the range A1 to H8, the value 2 property, move the chessboard values. I deleted the font to get more space. Okay, hang on.
What key does he press to make that happen?
I'm just hitting space to modify the line.
Oh, I see.
Okay, here we go. So I can add, I want to do that again. Okay, minimize it. So there are the chess pieces. So this is just to show that interop with COM, there's no problem with Unicode. Auto fit the columns. Okay, take the interior property. Get hold of all the references to the interiors of all the cells. Set the interior dot color. So this is an 8x8 array to the 256 decode each of the background color of the cell types of each cell of the board.
Is that monadic squad there, or squish, or whatever they call it?
That's monadic squish.
Okay, what does that do exactly?
What that does is if it's an APL array, it does nothing. It's
Okay.
indexing, give me everything.
Okay.
If the thing on the right is a collection, so something which supports what is it? I forget now. It's a collection is it's an object-oriented term or something where you can get hold of the first element and you can walk through it and get all the elements.
Okay.
Then it materializes all of the elements as APL arrays. So it converts the collection into an array.
Okay.
So what we end up with here is xl.activesheet.range returns an 8x8. Returns a range object. Right?
Okay. Okay.
Right?
And you're converting that to an
so
array.
we've got 64 of those. Right. Interior sub 1. It's an interior. What does it have? It's got
all this stuff.
got all this stuff. And we set the color property to be the background color of the cell types. So that's just.
Okay, so each square basically has a bunch of properties associated with it. Okay.
So we extracted some properties from the Dyalog GUI and converted them by doing the 256 decode into a color that Excel was happy with. Great.
Is Ordinal -2 the same as proc list?
It is almost the same.
Right, okay, I'll start playing with it.
It may be sorted differently. Okay, so move a piece, move a pawn, and then into the second sheet, put the content of the board, move a knight, put that into the third sheet.
Where? Oh, we don't see this.
No, well, we could see it. Right, we could go over here and we could say, well, what's on sheet 2? What's on sheet 3? Yeah. So I'm just putting those 8x8 arrays in one by one into Excel. Here I said Excel sheets number 2 and 3 dot columns sub iota 8. So these are just properties of the Excel sheet, right? So say take 2 sheets. For each sheet, extract 8 columns, and then so that gives me a 2-element array, each containing 8 elements, 8 objects. And then every one of those objects is a column object, and it has an auto-fit method. And the dot is like is pervasive on nested arrays of objects. So that calls the auto-fit method 16 times on this nested array of objects.
And what was value 2?
Value 2 is interesting. Clearly, when the Excel object model was put together, they had something called value, which they weren't happy with.
So this is the 19
So they have
version 2 of.
This is version 2 of the value property of
Okay.
the Excel.
Value 2, one's a method and one's a property.
Yes, I mean they.
One of them is a.
Method and one's a property.
Yeah.
And one returns the internal representation, one returns
So get the collection of sheets dot name. change the names of the sheets, right? So the names are now .q5 copy util disk, and then I mean, this is really not about Unicode, but it's cool object-oriented stuff. So take the workbook, index the sheets by their names this time, get the range C3 to D5, and get the value to of that. So that was 2 elements with a collect scalar. Each one of these is a scalar, but then each one of those has a 2 by 2 property. So that gives 2-element array.
So basically what you have there is what they call associative arrays, right? Is it Perl or Ruby? I think Perl's got one. Or basically
I've seen read papers on experimental languages which provide this.
there are some scripting languages. I think maybe Perl has them.
Yeah.
But basically you just, I don't want the 3rd element of the array. I want the Ponte King 4th element of the array.
Yes, Ruby.
Ruby, okay.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Stupid question. When were that characters' names in square brackets were introduced? In version 11 or version 12? Or even 10?
I think even before. What happened in version 11 was that we made this change that Ray was talking about. Range used to be a method. But from version 11, if quad wx is 3, we can somehow detect these indexer methods, and say if it's a collection that has an indexer method, then we will use this notation instead of seeing range as a method. In version 10, you would have to write this.
Yeah, like this.
Like that. Call the range method, and I think probably out of that. Yeah. And quad wx allows you to maintain the old syntax to keep.
Remember where is that documented?
In the release notes for version 10, which are also on that web page. The Dyalog.com/help also includes the version 11.
I was completely lost in time.
Okay. Oops, and I'm running out of time too. I think that's probably all. Oh no, close the workbooks and tell Excel to go away. But this arrays of objects, I did a presentation on this at Oops last year to a room full of Java people. And I got the impression afterwards they just said, I don't know what that was. And they moved on. Was it a bird? Was it a plane? It certainly had nothing to do with anything that I wanted to do. Actually, SQL supports this notation, right? When you go table name dot column, that means the value of column in every row, every element of the table collection. So SQL has this. It's the only sort of real language I know that supports it. Where were we? That's not the one. Okay. So how many people here use SQL for their ODBC? There's really nothing. Let's go very quickly through this. So if you have, say, here we have a SQL server, connect to SQL server. It's got an nvarchar, which is the name of the Unicode. There are 3 new data types: nvarchar, nchar. So you just with SQL you just select, and it automatically detects this is a Unicode column and deals with it. So you just get, it's just converted it into Unicode because that's what it was. Okay, so now you may have an SQL database that doesn't support Unicode, or you may be tied in to version 5 of Oracle or whatever from before they did Unicode. What do you do then? Well, it's actually quite common for data to be in relational tables in UTF-8 format as well. So here's the second column of data. I'll replace that by the quad UCS, the UTF-8 of that, and then convert it back into character form again. And then I will say, alter table, idioms, I add a column. It didn't have the necessary column, so make this change to the table, adding a UTF-8 expression column, which is a var binary, right? So that's not a Unicode column, that's just a binary data column in the database. And then I'll prepare an update expression with a binary buffer, 20 long, and with two bind variables. The first one is the character data, and the second one is the key, and then I'll just execute that expression with this matrix. So that calls it once for every row. And then I'll select that from there. So that gives us, when I then read it back out again, we've got the original Unicode column here, and here's the UTF-8 representation of that. And then I compare here the second column of data with the UTF-8, converted back from UTF-8 after removing the trailing nulls, because this is a fixed width binary thing, so there are actually zeros here that you can't see. But so I mean, if you do have to store the stuff in a relational database with UTF-8, then that's not a problem. Though of course, whether the database then supports searching it, we do not know. I think there may be databases which actually do that. They store the data in UTF-8 and they can search them, and they do the necessary stuff.
Why would that be unusual?
Well, it's a variable length encoding, so it's sort of a bit expensive to search, a bit tricky to search. Okay, so we'll just move. Let's not spend more time on that. It's documented. Okay, so here's something that I think a lot of people, Norbert asked about this. So if you're using quite an A to call dynamic link libraries, like Win32 API calls or something, some other library. In Classic and in earlier versions of Dyalog, you had two types of character parameters. There's type C, which was just untranslated bytes, and T, which meant that stuff was translated to ANSI before it was passed to the DLL. Now in Unicode, both are of course untranslated. There's no, data doesn't need translation. But what we have done, in the name of making code portable, is that if you now specify T without a length, so you don't say T1, you just say T without declaring a width per element, it simply means use wide characters according to the host convention. So that means in a classic system it's 1 byte. It's Windows, it's T2 and T4 for a Unix Linux system. So if you write declarations using these null-terminated string and so on, they should be portable across platforms. Now, some Unix systems do actually expect you to UTF-8 encode the parameters to system calls. I think file names typically in Unix are expected to be UTF-8. We haven't done anything about that. So if you have to pass UTF-8 data, you're going to have to again use quad UCS. But if this is a big problem for somebody to talk to us, we just thought it would be best to leave it out at this point. Yeah, as I said. And then if you're in Windows, there's a problem in that, I guess as part of making it easy to write portable C programs, the Win32 library calls are typically overloaded. Well, I don't think this is overloaded. This is the inverse of overloading. You have the same method with two names. So there's a function called like message box A, which means it's expecting text to be passed in ANSI. And then there's one with W for wide, which expects UTF-16. And what we've done is that in a quad A call, if you say, well, the name of the function is star, ends with a star, so message box star, we'll pick message box A from the classic system and message box W in the Unicode system.
You have to then use the left-hand argument to coordinate, to name your function
Yes,
in
you
the
should.
standard
I think if you don't, we will call it message box. Without an A or a
that
W.
is useful to know.
I think.
Is it?
But it's some time since we designed that, so, and I don't write a lot of these, so I forgot. So again, the intention is we give you a mechanism, your code, you can write code which works in Classic, and then when you port it to Unicode, the same code should work. So for example, you could write, to call the Win32 message box API, if you write this code which doesn't declare the widths of your T's, that says message box star. I think the answer to your question is it is called message box.
That's nice.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, there's this final comment here, which probably won't impact many people, but strictly speaking, just declaring it as 2 bytes wide in Windows is not enough. If you have something which is, that Han Chinese which is 4 bytes wide, you should UTF-16 encode it. But for all, commonly occurring text, including APL or symbols, I believe, there's no difference between UTF-16 and UTF-2. But there's a cutoff point there somewhere up near the top of the first plane that, I don't know exactly where it lies, where you will get into trouble. Okay, so we are nearing the end. Now, this is one of the things that I think is really important, and even if, it's maybe difficult to convince a room full of mostly old dogs to change the way they store source code, but I expect that the new people who come into APL, and they are happily coming in now in increasing numbers, will find this to be really natural, storing APL source in text files and using other tools than APL to do various types of source code management. So in version 11 we added a tool called Salt, which is just a simple way to, we saw an example of it earlier where you loaded a text file containing a class into APL. And as we've seen, you don't have to use Salt. You can, if you want to save a function in a UTF-8 file, you just say system.io file, write all text, quad VR foo, system text encoding UTF-8, and it's saved in the UTF-8 file. And when you read it, you just bang. So Salt is sort of a bit of code on top of that, but essentially, because we didn't use .NET. Work on Unix systems as well. But basically that's all Salt is doing, is reading files and writing files to store namespaces, classes, and from version 12 also functions. You can use Salt to salt individual functions.
So if you're not using Unicode, Salt on a Unix system, is there a Unicode translation that's happening? Or Salt doesn't do that translation of Unix if you don't need it, or how do you?
No, Salt does it Salt doesn't use .NET.
Right.
Salt does the UTF-8 core UCS when it writes it, and in version 11 there was a huge amount of code that Nick had written to actually do the UTF-8 encoding in APL. Well, it's not huge, but it's quite nasty. And what this allows you to do, I'm preaching a bit here, there are a lot of very useful tools out there, both free ones and things you have to pay for, that are built for other languages but are actually useful with APL as well. And a lot of people are in situations where they're trying to justify the use of APL to an IT department with a very traditional view on things. And being able to salt your source code in an environment like that will make a large part, a sizable chunk of the criticism go away. And they say, well, we can't put your stuff into source safe, they say. So APL doesn't comply with corporate standards for source code management. It has to die just for that, for that reason. And now you can say, well, we'll sort it. You can put it in Visual Source Safe or Subversion or whatever you like. It's suddenly, compliant. You can diff it using tools for comparison that the auditors are comfortable with, and it makes us much more respectable, which I think is important. And some of these tools are also really good. And if you're trying to recruit young developers to your team, they'll be familiar with a lot of these tools, and they'll be off to a flying start when they use API. And I think the way we've designed Solve and so on is this doesn't mean you have to go into an edit, compile, debug cycle of work. And if I don't run out of time, I'll have a minute to show you that. But just showing this on some foils. So here's my little application. It's a folder. It contains one of these salt files called MyApp.Dyalog. And that's just it's a simple thing that I wrote for a presentation in Berlin, obviously. It just pops up a little form with a button on it. And so I can, without having to start APL, I can send this to somebody and say, well, just open that file and you can read the code. They click on it with Notepad. They can see all the source code. They don't actually need to have APL installed to check it out. And then I've installed something called Subversion, which we're now using at Dyalog both to manage the C source and the APL source. And I can right-click. You see, my application now has a red exclamation mark. That means I changed it since I loaded it from the repository. I can then right-click on it, and I can, this is a GUI tool built on top of Subversion called Tortoise SVN. I can say, show me the log, and then you can see I've been working on this thing for 2 years now. I've done, I did stuff in Berlin and made a change just to show how Subversion works. So I can have a look at the log there. And then I can right-click on it and I can say diff. Right? And I've downloaded a tool called Compare It, which I think it took me an evening. I looked at 2 or 3 different tools on the internet, and this one supported UTF-8. I downloaded it, free trial version. I paid $29.95 for it, and it just compares APL source code beautifully. And there are lots of tools like this. If you don't like this one, there's a dozen. There's Beyond Compare. And APL people say, oh, I built my own and so on. But I think this one is certainly nicer than one I ever built. Mm-hmm. And it's got merging. You see there are buttons here, so you can say, well, I'm going to keep this, move it over here. Oh. You can,
nice.
Okay, and let me see if I can. I've still got 7 minutes left. So here's my application. Yeah. And let me just make a little change to it, just to show you that we haven't sacrificed our way of life. Let's put an error in here, 1 divided by 0, just to make it realistic. Okay, so there's my code. This .diapp is a very experimental thing that's been in there. Edit that. This is just a sort of a script for loading this application. It says load this salt utilities, load MyApp. So that's just the name of this thing here, and then execute this expression myapp.main. And if I double click on that, version 11 and 12 have the associations set up in Windows to then start APL and then run this, boot the application and run it. Okay, so, there's a bug.
1 plus 0, 1 divided by
1
0.
divided by 0. Oh, I think I know how to fix that.
I think I see the problem.
Yeah, okay, so I'll experimental change, fix. And you see, when you then hit escape in the editor, it says, it knows that it loaded this function from CMyApp and MyApp.Dyalog, and it asks me if I want to update the source file. Yes, I do. I continue to the statement here is a quad off, right? But my application has been, the source code has been fixed. And I can now, I can right click on it and I can say, okay, so what is it in this thing? And it says, okay, now there's more things that have changed since it was last committed to the database, and I can commit it and put in comments and so on. And I don't see how this, and this doesn't ruin my life as an APL programmer at all. I mean, it hasn't prevented me from the style of APL development that I'm comfortable with. It's just adding more tools. I mean, there's no way we want to get, build. We will never build an APL system. We should never use words like that. That would require you to, fire up some massive development environment and get into an edit compiler. Okay, I don't think I really have time to discuss keyboarding.
Yes.
Let me see what else is here. We can discuss keyboarding. You can ask me
7
about
o'clock,
keyboarding,
right?
You can ask me about keyboarding because the time's up in 4 minutes. So
I'll ask you at 5.
So the one question is, are you migrating? I mentioned this earlier. Is it just because you want to stay current with Dyalog APL, you want performance enhancements and so on that we're putting into the product, or do you really need to support foreign text in your application? Probably you should have time for a cycle where you just try and upgrade the application to Unicode first, and then add the new support. If you're brave, you can try and do both. If you only want to do the former and you don't want to support Chinese characters in your application, then you actually, when you make the conversion to Unicode, you may need to put in checks which actively prevent those characters from entering your system. Right? If you're using, you've got an SQL database if your backend is an Oracle system where the field type is char, you do not want to be trying to put Chinese characters into it. Maybe you can get back to me on this. If you look at this and you decide that's a huge risk, you really need something in the Dyalog GUI where you could at the top level say, well, don't allow the user, I know this is the Unicode edition, but do not allow the user to type anything which is not ANSI. It's a rather odd thing to do, but maybe in a transitional period it would make sense for us to provide something like that, just to avoid accidental damage. I think the worst thing that would happen actually is that, user types in a Chinese character, you write it to an SQL database, it turns into a question mark. But that might cause chaos. So you need to know. The hardest thing about this, I guess, is knowing how the external systems, the systems outside APL, are going to work. Because if you're just using APL component files, you can put Chinese characters in them, no problem. You can throw them into Excel. But if you're interfacing with somebody who has a legacy COBOL system that you export text files to, and they don't intend to rewrite that, then you have to decide what to do if you've got a Unicode character in your data. If you write a question mark, you blow up, what do you do? And so this is sort of like the agenda, slightly reorganized. You have to go looking for your dyadic coordinates if you have any at all, and maybe the monadic ones as well. You need to at least think about whether and that's probably trivial, looking for the upgrades of character data. If you're using APL style TCP sockets, you need to think about whether you upgrade the client at the same time as the server. We have tools in there to make that manageable, but you need to make a plan. Do you need to interop with earlier versions? Very often, large companies, or if you're selling software to large companies, you can't easily get back versions of your product upgraded. You need to think about external variables. Well, you can't put Unicode into it. Your own DLLs and APs. I mean, I think our experience was rewriting those is not hard, but it's a few days work and then testing. Yes.
Just a question about the kind of map files.
Yeah.
Is it a problem if you port to a Unicode version and map file is only something you do internally? For example, if you just, for example, I'm using map files.
Yeah. Do you map files with type 82?
Yeah, I'm just using version 11 so far, so I haven't.
Yeah, so you map them with type. Are you storing any APL characters in there, or characters which are not?
No, I'm just storing, you can say, numerical data, in a sense.
Numerical data? Formatted numeric data?
Yeah, just the APL.
In text?
No, the only reason I'm using it is actually just to not to have all this data in the workspace.
Yes, but what is the format of the data in the text, in the file?
It is just the numerical data.
So it's type 323 or 645?
Yeah.
Or is it formatted? Is it, do you format it and then write it to the map file?
I can't remember.
Okay, well, the answer to the question depends on that.
Yeah.
So if it's in type 323 or 645, you don't need to make any changes at all.
Yeah.
If it's just formatted numbers, you just need to change the 82 to an 80, and it'll come in exactly as it used to.
But I think it is just numerical data,
Yeah.
not formatted.
And in fact, 80, you're just leaving it as 82 would work as well.
Yeah.
So you may not need to make any changes at all.
Certainly.
Yeah. The place where you get into trouble is if you've written your own smart database management system that reads stuff as characters and then says, and I know the first 4 bytes are a float and the next, 2 bytes are a short integer.
Okay.
But again, if you've done that, the conversion you need to do is probably trivial. You just need to change the 82 to an 80 in most cases. And then your quad DR conversions will work.
Okay, but you mentioned that you could say map files in certain variable or something which you might consider doing differently in the future.
Yeah, external variables. I mean, we don't decide this, right?
No.
We're just telling you we would prefer external variables to go away. There are a whole bunch of old features that we would like people to stop using because they make it really hard for us going forward. People say, you want to build a .NET version of APL, or do you want it to be able to use quad FMT? Or a quad FMT I don't think is in any danger, but say quad SM or something.
The kind of map files, what should we use instead, for example?
No, actually the map files that I recommended you get rid of are the map files where there's an APL header in them, and they are actually like an external variable.
Okay.
So your use of map files is fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So for native files, if what's in the native files is not APL characters, if it's just ANSI stuff like, say, digits and ordinary ANSI letters, you probably just need to change the 82 to an 80. But if you really want to make a Unicode application, you probably want to convert the format to UTF-8 so that it's easier for the other applications that you interoperate with to use the text. But that's only if it contains anything outside the ANSI range. Yeah. So you need to look at your coordinate calls. You don't have to get rid of your underscores, but it's not that hard, I don't think, because you completely mess up all your diffs. And then think about whether salt subversion or your own form of writing source code to Unicode files and then using industry standard source code management building tools might help your business. So how many people have changed their mind about upgrading to Unicode in the near future?
No, I'll still do it.
No, I'm with him.
You've weakened my resolve.
If,
I said you've weakened my resolve.
Yeah. You're essentially writing a new application.
You mean I don't count?
No, but
Yeah.
you've got.
I have no
versions
connections.
anyway.
My code wasn't working anyway.
Yeah, your
Right.
code wasn't working. Yeah, Klaus?
No, I will definitely go to version 12, but that's the main reason is for the subversion program.
Yeah. Yeah, but that also works with the classic version. Right?
Yeah, I know that.
Say
So you might even say it's
works with version 11. Because I mean, what we would suggest, migrate to V12 Classic as soon as possible, so that you're in a position to start making these changes that will make the code work with version 12 Unicode. Then, mark your files as non-Unicode if you want to be really safe, and then start firing the application up in Unicode and see how much breaks. You might want to wait until, if you're building a product, you might want to wait until the release of your product that's built on 12 Classic is out. Again, that depends on how adventurous you are, and then move your application. And I would suggest this is a reasonable time frame for even large applications. Though I understand the logistics of making this change when you consider a very large application with many interfaces may mean, we will definitely still have customers beyond 4 years using Classic. It's unthinkable to me anyway that everywhere would be going to Unicode by then. Hope my time is more than that. But I mean, I'll stay here until there are no more questions. Ooh. When Paul at the back.
You mentioned that he was going to put in chess pieces into his font.
Yeah.
That brings up a question I've been wondering about. If you are using Japanese, Chinese characters, they seem to be in, and I think you use this in your demo a lot, the MS Unicode, Arial Unicode font.
Yeah.
So if you're writing if you have a little edit box that you're presenting to a user to do a little script-like thing, and they are doing, select from the database where, in quotes, and they know how to type things in Japanese characters, it's pretty much limited to using that font. Is that correct?
No,
that face-based font. How do you...
All the operating systems seem to try and find, if they don't, they have a list of fonts that they go through, which is probably configurable.
Will they mix and match? No, I mean, we have...
Yeah, I think they will. They will mix and match. I don't know exactly what criteria they use. They may say, well, it has to be a font which has certain characteristics in common with the, it has to be fixed width or variable width or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. We're still struggling a bit to understand that. It's different in Linux to Windows, and it's different. It's different in Internet Explorer from Firefox, and so Unicode is still not totally mature, although it's nearly 20 years old. But it's getting dramatically better. I mean, in the last few years, the support for Unicode has become very much better.
I had a question. You did a demonstration before. You had like the Greek letter alpha, and then you had the alpha APL character.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the reason for that is if a Greek person wanted to write code in APL, they want to distinguish between their alphabet and the APL character set. That's the reason. But you also said that the APL character set is sort of sprinkled throughout. I mean, all the APL characters were. Sometimes you're borrowing symbols from other sets and everything?
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't there at the time, but I mean, many of the APL symbols were obviously already in Unicode, right? Because it's mathematical and it's Greek. So
yes, but I mean, you wouldn't want to use the Greek, if it's the Greek alphabet, you wouldn't want to use that particular.
No, but the decision about whether you want to reuse the symbol or not depends on what your application is trying to do. It's very complicated question.
Well, one of the things the reason I was asking this is I was thinking, this opens up, you have a whole bunch of new symbols that if you wanted to introduce a new symbol to APL, you have a lot of power there.
Yeah, you have to be able to type them though.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And keyboarding is where Unicode has doesn't solve any problems essentially. Well, it cleans things up a bit, but it doesn't. If a Japanese person wants to be able to type English and Japanese and APL, he's going to have to switch between keyboards.
Yeah.
You cannot create one keyboard to do English, Japanese, and APL.
Are you still limited to 256 characters in code? I don't know.
You mean our internal
Yeah.
byte code?
I mean, in writing APL code, user code, or can you?
No, you can have,
I know
character
you had
concepts.
examples
You can have
of multiple
comments
levels.
in Japanese.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Cool.
I don't know if this is very quick or not. I mean, I've only been playing with 12 Unicode a little bit, but the first thing I got sort of hung up with was at the top of the screen you've got your session font,
Yeah.
APL 305 Unicode, which is fair enough. And presumably you can select any Unicode font that suits
Yeah.
if you wanted to change it. And then down in the icons tray at the bottom, you've got keyboard. You select your United Kingdom, UK Dialog Control, UK
Yeah.
Dialog Alt Graph.
Yeah. I've got mine up there.
Okay, you've got yours on the top. So what's the purpose of all that?
Okay, that was the keyboarding question.
Yeah, cool.
What's the purpose of that? Well, you've got to have a way to enter APL into the session to make this useful. People have tried with Alt and keys to do APL, and Control and keys, and any approach has its problems. And the problems are getting worse because Microsoft Office is taking more and more keys and saying, well, this will be an accelerated key. Even now, Alt graphics combinations are becoming accelerated keys in applications. And our idea was we would provide a bunch of different keyboards that people could choose so that they conflicted as little as possible with whatever was their favorite application. And we were sort of very happy about this a couple of years ago, and Adrian was going around being very enthusiastic because he found this Microsoft keyboard layout creator, and anybody could edit their own keyboard easily using the standard tool from Microsoft. But when you sort of Google around and so on, you find out that this tool is sort of a bit of an orphan. It doesn't seem to be really well supported by Microsoft. And then when you use these keyboards, you discover that you have all these conflicts with accelerated keys.
But is that a hotkey, same thing?
Yeah, it's a hotkey. It's a hotkey issue. So at the moment, I'm thinking that the old IME that was brought in with Dialog.net 10 version 10 is actually going to be a useful thing, because an IME is like this Japanese thing. It actually completely takes over the keyboard. It prevents, accelerator keys can't be captured by the application in the background because it doesn't see them until the IME decides to send Unicode keys onwards in the system. So if you really want an APL keyboard that's always going to be an APL keyboard, you need to use an IME, because otherwise you cannot prevent the applications from assigning different meaning to control this, alt that, or alt or something else, because they have the ability then to stack it and steal it.
Maybe that was the problem I was having earlier with Dan on the object orientation. Fiddling around doing certain things seemed to be changing the in subtle ways and going back to this keyboard.
Okay, well there's a problem that virtually everybody hits that I will now show you. If you right click on this, go to settings. On the advanced key settings, there are hotkeys for input languages. And in particular, there's one which has a default setting in Windows to switch between input languages. And that, by default, it's Alt, Left, Shift, or something funny. And if you hit that key combination, it will switch to the next, it will cycle through the languages that you have available. And that, I think, causes a lot of confusion people find there. I don't know if that's what you've been experiencing. But
that's probably what I'm doing in actual fact, yeah.
Certainly a lot of people have that problem. So you can see here I've disabled it. None. Don't have a key for switching between input.
Good idea.
I think I'll do that straight away.
Oh,
This IME animal, so I'm running Linux and I'm happily, running APL, but I'd really like to use, Vim or Emacs or something as my APL editor.
yeah. Well, then there's a conflict. You want to
Huh?
use the same key for two different things.
No, I want to use the same, I want the same glyph to appear in the session when I hit the same set of keys in two different applications, which is what happens today. I strike an unshifted A and I get a minuscule A appearing in both session managers.
Okay.
Or in the edit session and in the APL session.
Yeah,
So
I
I want the whatever the magic button is, unshifted I to produce an iota in both of them. Well, but the unshifted but controlled or altered or alt-grouped,
Yes.
I to produce an iota.
I think at the moment the only keyboard that we have distributed with the IME is the control keyboard, like the one we have to go control something to get.
What is it? The IME takes over all applications?
No, it's on an application by application
Okay.
basis. When you enable the IME and switch the IME, it actually pops up. There's a button. You can switch it on and off.
Okay.
So when it's off, you have an ordinary keyboard, so control. Oops. In theory, you should be able to. I'm not sure what the APL session is doing when it gets.
That's an IME button, is it?
This is a bit of the user interface popped up by the IME, which allows you to switch it on and off. And that's on a window by window basis. So if I move the focus to Internet Explorer, it goes away.
Right. So how do I turn it on for Internet Explorer?
Well, then you have to again while Internet Explorer has the focus. Switch it.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay.
Or you might have an accelerator key to switch between them. Alexa.
No.
No?
Think.
Okay. We're running out of steam. Anyway, I hope I haven't discouraged people. I mean, it really, for most applications, you just load them and they run, right? But if you have interfaces, there are things you need to think about. But I mean, there are things that you would have to think about regardless of, you're using APL or using C or whatever you're using to write the application. If it's built from lots of different components, they all have to go to Unicode at the same time, or the ones that go to Unicode need to know how to deal with the ones that haven't got Unicode.
One should be very selfish not to use it.
I mean, I think for you,
Yeah, it's vital. Yeah, it's absolutely
much more of
vital.
an upside than an downside. It's harder for people from, people used to 7-bit ASCII. That's where it's,
Before that, the life was just one long pain.
yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, this is cool. Load ABU. Get my APL font back. Go. Alt std Russian dot 355 reshape. Okay. Doesn't like this anymore. Row what I mean. Well, let's make that the 3-1 reshape. Tab. So there's three different. There's the alt std and Russian whatever. All at once.
No, it's a great job done. I mean, that small window you introduced is really a kind of puzzle because as it's bound to the APL window, and if you have to use the switch keyboard layout at the same time, then it's a nightmare because it not only depends on the switch of the layout, but also on the position of the button. But you see the button only when you got focus on APL video. So
we mistakenly, until quite recently, thought that these Microsoft keyboard things sort of solved that problem once and for all. We could essentially leave it to people to define their own keyboards. We need have another cycle to do on that. So I think we need to bring the IME back and beef it up a bit so that it becomes more useful. Keyboarding remains
A mess.
in the chat.
Same under X.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's Windows, Unix, doesn't matter where you are. And I suppose it doesn't really matter whether it's APL or Japanese or what your problem is if it's not English. If you're not monolingual, you have issues.
Well, it sounds a little bit silly because, well, these are mostly us, maybe some Eastern countries who really interested in that stuff. But the amount of work done and the way it's done, it's very hard to assess properly. Probably only us could see how big job was completed while you did that project, converting to Unicode. But it's tremendous job, and it's done up to the end. Well, we tested that, we worked with that, we are going to work with that, and I often think, how could I do that? Well, I can't find any way other than you did. So it's just an excellent mark. It's absolutely useful stuff and done absolutely reasonably. There are no essential drawbacks in that. So.
Oh, to hear that from a Russian.
Yeah, it would take time. It would take time people to really assess that and evaluate it.
I'm happy to. Very happy to hear that.
Oh, I should say that.
You're here.
Hope the English can understand it as well.
I hope so. But Moscow Stock Exchange will be the major one.
Okay, well, thank you very much.